Good morning and welcome to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. My name is Bill Benson. I am the host of the museum's public program, First Person. Thank you for joining us today. We are in our 17th year of the First Person program, and our first person today is Mrs. Rita Rubinstein, who we shall meet shortly. This 2016 season of First Person is made possible by the generosity of the Lewis Franklin Smith Foundation with additional funding from the Arlene and Daniel Fisher Foundation. We are grateful for their sponsorship, and I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Lewis Smith, who's in the audience with us right here. First Person is a series of conversations with survivors of the Holocaust who share with us their firsthand accounts of their experience during the Holocaust. Each of our First Person guests serves as volunteers here at this museum. Our program will continue twice weekly through mid-August. The museum's website at www.ushmm.org provides information about each of our upcoming first-person guests. Anyone interested in keeping in touch with the museum and its programs can complete the Stay Connected card that you'll find in your program or speak with a museum representative at the back of the theater. In doing so, you will receive an electronic copy of Rita Rubinstein's biography so that you can remember and share her testimony after you leave here today. Rita will share with us her first-person account of her experience during the Holocaust and as a survivor for about 45 minutes. If we have time toward the end of our program for some questions, you'll have an opportunity to ask those of her. The life stories of Holocaust survivors transcend the decades. What you are about to hear from Rita is one individual's account of the Holocaust. We've prepared a brief slide presentation to help with her introduction, and we begin this portrait with this portrait of Rita shown here between her Aunt Bella and cousin Bela Schulwolf, who perished in the Holocaust. Rita was born Rivka Lifshitz in December 1936 in Văscăuti, Romania. The arrow on this map points to Văscăuti. Here we see an engagement photograph of Rita's parents, Tabel and Abraham. Rita's father ran a dry goods store and a small factory with his sister and brother-in-law in this house, which is pictured on the right, which also served as the family home. Their factory had a few looms to weave native Ukrainian clothing that was sold in the store. In 1940, the Soviet Army marched into Văscăuti and drafted young men, including Rita's father, into the army. When Axis troops invaded the Soviet Union the next year, Romanian soldiers entered Văscăuti and told all the Jews to prepare to leave within 24 hours. Rita's family was able to bribe Romanian soldiers who took the family to a ghetto in Transnistria. The area known as Transnistria is shown on this map. Once there, a village family took Rita's family in. Rita was able to attend a small class, but during the 3 years the family lived in the ghetto, they faced terrible hardships. After they were liberated, the family was eventually able to return home. After the war, Rita attended a Ukrainian school in what had become communist Romania. By obtaining false papers, Rita, her mother, and her aunt were able to travel from Romania to a displaced persons camp in Germany that was administered by HIAS and the United Nations Relief Organization. We close our slide show with this picture of Rita in her Purim costume. Rita arrived in the United States in 1949 with her mother and her mother's husband, an Auschwitz survivor whom she met in the displaced persons camp. They settled in New York City. Rita married Nathan Rubinstein in 1959, the same year Nathan entered the University of Maryland for his master's degree. Rita graduated from Brooklyn College in 1960, then joined Nathan in Maryland, where she began teaching elementary school in Olney, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. She left teaching to have and raise their 3 daughters, Nina, Sherry, and Renee. When the girls were older, Rita began teaching at a Yiddish Hebrew school, then later became its principal. After retiring from the school, Rita became a private tutor for bar and bat mitzvahs, including for adults who haven't had their bar or bat mitzvah. Nathan passed away at age 58 in 1995. He had lost most of his family during the Holocaust, but he survived with his parents in Siberia. After the war, they came to the U.S., and after service in the U.S. Army, Nathan began a career as a scientist at the Johns Hopkins Applied Research Lab in Baltimore with a top-secret clearance. Their 3 daughters have a combined 8 grandchildren. Daughter Nina is an industrial psychologist with 2 children. Daughter Sherry is an attorney with 4 children, and Renee is a pediatric nurse at Johns Hopkins Hospital with 2 children. 4 of Rita's grandchildren are now college graduates. Her oldest grandson just completed his first year of dental school at the University of Maryland. Rita plans to attend the graduations of 2 other grandchildren next spring, one from the University of University of Michigan, and the other from high school. Rita's daughter Sherry is with us today, as is Renee's daughter and Rita's granddaughter Chelsea and Rita's cousin Cheryl Silverman, who are all with us right here in the front row. Rita is very active in her community. 17 years ago, she formed a singing group, the Happy Matzo Balls, which still performs at area nursing homes, senior centers, and places such as the National Institutes of Health and the Catholic University of America, as well as here at this museum. She also sings with the Encore Chorus. Rita is a volunteer at a local hospice and has traveled to Israel to do volunteer work for the Israeli army. And Rita volunteers here at the museum as well by translating documents and videos of survivor experiences during the Holocaust from Yiddish to English. She is speaking publicly more frequently about her Holocaust experience, including recently at granddaughter Chelsea's school, Chelsea's with us today, and the Roland Park Country School for Girls in Baltimore. And with that, I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming our first person, Mrs. Rita Rubinstein. Rita, thank you so much for joining us and being willing to be our first person and having several of your family members in attendance with us today. You have a great deal to tell us, so we'll start right away. Although World War II began with Germany and the Soviet Union attacking Poland in September 1939, war didn't come directly to your community in Romania until 1940. Before we turn to your life during the war and the Holocaust, let's start first with you telling us a little bit about your family and their community and your early life before war actually began for you.
Okay. It's going back a long way, because as you heard, I'm 79 now. Going back to age 4, I have fragmented pieces of memory, but I do remember some happy times, thank God. You know, as a human being, we try to block out the bad. Remember the bad too, of course. I had a wonderful family. My dad's mother lived with us, and we shared a 2-family home. He was doing well. He had 2 sisters in the United States who immigrated, and when they were only 16 and 17, because my grandmother was a widow, left with 4 children after World War I. So she sent the other 2 to the Golden Land, where you could find gold in the street. But they wound up working in sweatshops. So we did have some family whom I never met. My mother had not met either. And her 2 younger children were left with her. And then they did well. They had a textile machine, weaving loom, and they would weave native costumes, as you mentioned, and scarves. My mother stood in a store. They had a store, the 2-family house. It was a modern house. We had a radio. We had electricity, not running water yet, but we had a nanny for me. My grandmother lived with us, my father's mother, and then his sister and 2 children, and the grandmother, my uncle's mother, lived with them as well. So we had 2 older, we were all together in the one house, and it was a very happy time. I had a doll carriage, I had dolls, I had lots of friends. My father, I was the first grandchild. My mother was one of 8 children. Unfortunately, only 2 of them, she and her sister, survived. So my grandparents lived in a small village not far from us. We would frequently visit them. They were doting grandparents, and I had aunts and uncles. An aunt was only 7 years older than I.
So a very large extended family.
Large extended family, and I remember my grandmother who lived with us, she didn't want me to make use of the doll carriage too much. He says, don't take it out so much. Unfortunately, little did we know that I would not use it for a very long period of time.
Tell us a little bit about your mother and father. What do you know about your father?
My father was a wonderful, what I heard, because I don't
course.
really recall. I do recall that he would take me every Sabbath to the temple. He loved to perform services. Of course, he had lost his father, but he did a lot of good for people. He would, in the dry goods store, if somebody could not afford an item that they liked, he would give them credit and said, don't worry, you'll pay me when you can. Very charitable. He was
He had a lovely voice, you told me, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
He had a wonderful voice, and they wanted him to conduct services. He also served on the ritual committee, so I tried to follow in his footsteps. And I guess I love to sing, and that's where I inherited that from him.
You've definitely continued that.
Yes.
One of your grandfathers served in the First World War. Is
Yes.
that right? Yes.
And he was killed then.
Do you know anything about his service?
Not really.
Not really.
No.
What languages did your family speak?
Okay. Well, this was Austria-Hungary before I was born, and then became Romania. When I was born in Romania. So a lot of the families, Jewish families, spoke German to their children. But my grandmother, may she rest in peace, she insisted that her granddaughter would speak Yiddish. And thanks to her that I did speak Yiddish, and I learned how to read and write it later on in DP camp. So that's where I have the love of Yiddish as well, thanks to her. They also spoke German, they spoke Romanian. I did not speak Romanian at all because I had not gone to school there.
Right.
There's many people that I meet, do you speak Romanian? I said, sorry, because I didn't have schooling there.
Rita, of course, war began when the Soviet Union and Germany attacked Poland in September 1939, beginning World War II. It was some months later, though, before war directly affected you and your family, when the Soviets occupied your hometown of Văscăuti in Romania in 1940. Although you were not yet 4 at that time, tell us what you can, from what you've been able to gather and learn and what little fragments you remember, about the time under the Soviet occupation, the first time that you were occupied by the Soviets.
Okay, well, our happy family life really changed. We had to close the store. My mother's sister had been with us. That was her good luck. She was with us for a year. She was 7 years younger than my mother.
This is Bella?
The only surviving sister, right? And she worked at a tax office. I was no longer free to play in the streets. They took they conscripted all the able-bodied men into the army. And of course, my father was one of the able-bodied men. That was the last time I was to see him. I was 4.5 at the time.
So he's conscripted into the Soviet Army?
Into the Soviet Army. For some reason, my uncle was not. And that was the last time I saw my dad when he left with the Russian armies. But at least I have the knowledge that he was fighting against the Germans. He was in their army. We will talk about
we'll come back
that
to
later.
That, yeah.
Yes.
Tell me, how many other men were drafted into the labor brigades and into the army? Your father was just 36 or 37 years of age at that time, I think. So now it's your mother and your aunt. Your father's gone. Do you know how they were able to make ends meet during that time?
There was a black market, and they used to barter, had exchanges. It was a tough time for us.
One of the things I know you're going to want to talk to a little bit later is about what you brought with you, the prayer shawl. That was your father's.
That was my father's.
That was your father's, and I know we'll come back to
Yes.
that.
Yes.
You mentioned that it was Bella's good fortune that she was with you. Say a little bit more about that. Why was it her good fortune?
Okay, the reason it was her good fortune, my grandfather also owned a dry goods store as well as an orchard, and he had many friends, Ukrainian friends, and they too would come into, he was a very pious man. My grandmother worked very hard. She raised 8 children and did everything from scratch. Even her jams were made from scratch, everything. All that changed, of course, and when those Ukrainian neighbors who were friends, they thought there's a special exhibit. In fact, they were our neighbors, our friends. Mm-hmm. They turned on them. The reason we did not know that until after the war. After the war, my mother wanted to know what happened to her family. And they described to her the horrible deaths that they met. They used farm implements. My grandfather had to witness how they brutally murdered my aunts and uncle. And telling that to a survivor, my mother was 28 at the time, to hear the horrible deaths that they met. It was needless to say.
In fact, I think we're right around the anniversary date of when that happened.
Yes, yes. And he was left to the end. He had to witness how they murdered, not killed, but really murdered his family, and then they murdered him. It was a horrible end.
June 22nd, 1941, 75 years ago today, Germany and its allies turned on the Soviets, and Romanian troops, Germany's allies, occupied your town.
Yes, they did.
And that's when things really turned profoundly worse. Tell us, and you remember, as I understand, you remember when the Romanian troops marched in.
Yes.
Tell us about that time and what happened once you were under the control of the Romanians and the Nazis.
Well, I do remember the march. In fact, my cousin, who was 7 years older than I, he was adventurous, and he went up to the attic and looked outside. He was watching the march, and a soldier noticed that somebody was looking out. And they came in with bayonets, and they said, okay, you have spies here. Here was my mother, my grandmother, and then my aunt and uncle. We did not know what to do. We were really frightened. The kids all went under the beds. And they said, look, we didn't mean any harm. He just looked outside. He wanted to see soldiers marching.
Just a little boy.
Yes,
little boy.
He was just a little boy. He was about 9 or 10, not even, yes. So that was the first taste of it. Then they took, my aunt was working, as I explained before. They took 20 Jews out in the courtyard at random, really, just because they were Jews. And they wanted to show everybody their strength and what they would do. They shot them simply because they were Jews. And one of them worked in the same office as my aunt. He was an engineer. And in September of 41, an announcement was made to all the Jews that we had to be ready within 24 hours to leave our homes, and only could take with us whatever we could carry, nothing else. My mother had hidden what was dear to us. That's why I have some pictures. Some of my friends who are survivors have no pictures of their youth. She put photographs and some money in the attic, but in the floor of the attic. And my grandmother, I remember that, she had money sewn in her undergarments. And I said, Grandma, what are you doing that for? She said, you never know, it might save our lives. And indeed, she was a wise lady. It did save our lives. And I do remember being bundled up in layers and layers of clothing. And my mother
So to take whatever you could carry, so put lots of clothes on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
and bedding, and they had it in sacks, and and my mother held on to my father's suits and his prayer shawl. That amazing, that's
Right.
the only thing that did survive the war. So it has a lot of meaning to me.
When they told you to be prepared to leave in 24 hours, do you know if you had any idea where they intended to take you?
Actually, no, but word was that they were supposed to take us to a death camp. Pretoria it was called. But we were taken by a train, and we were in a holding place. And my uncle had overheard some people, we were supposed to be in the death camp, that some
Who was with you at this point?
Oh, at this point, okay, there were 9 of us.
9 of you, okay.
My aunt and her children and husband and her mother-in-law, and my aunt Bella, my mother's sister, my mother, my grandmother, and myself. And so there were 9, and we were all together.
And your uncle, and you'd heard that you were going to end up going to a death
Yes,
camp.
but of course our life was in danger.
Right.
Because they could have shot us, or this was at night that we snuck out, and they took us across a river on barges, and there were many soldiers. Even though they took the money, that's where my grandmother's money came.
Oh, and you
Yeah.
go back over that. So at your uncle, this is where he bribed the soldiers?
He bribed them with
Okay,
the
so
money that my grandmother had.
So to avoid going where you thought you were going?
Right. So they were going to take us to Transnistria,
Okay.
also Transnistria, but Shargorot, which was a ghetto where the Jews are allowed to be in one special place. You had restrictions. You could only go out at certain times. But I'll explain the conditions there. Let me get back to the point.
So your uncle bribed?
Oh, yes.
Yep.
My uncle bribed, and we snuck out at night, and we were on a barge. And while we
all
were
9
on
of
the
you?
barge, already crossing the Dnieper River, a soldier was holding me by the hand. And I guess I was a blonde with brown eyes at the time, and the soldier, there were some righteous, thank God there were righteous Gentiles. There were always good people. I wish there had been more, so more people would have been saved. And he looked at my mother's anguished face, and he said, "Don't worry, I have a little girl just like that at home, and I will do no harm to your child." And he meant what he said, and we, thank God, crossed the Dnieper River, and it was okay. So that was the first time she almost lost me, but one of a few times.
Right. And you had explained to me before that there were other children on barges who didn't make it, who were
They were thrown into the river.
thrown into the
And
river.
they did not know how to swim. I did not know how to swim either. So same thing would have happened to me.
So thanks to your uncle using the money that your grandmother had hidden, as you described,
Yes.
you were able to make it across the river, and now you're in Shargorot. And you would
Shargorot, right.
remain there for 3 years in the ghetto of
Yes.
Shargorot. Although life there was very, very, very hard, you remember there were actually some good memories of that time, too,
Yeah.
that you described.
Well,
Tell
let me
us-
just...
Well, tell us about that time. You spent 3 years
Okay,
there.
well, there was a Jewish family.
Okay.
There were Jews there. It was a ghetto. And they were forced to take us in. They were very kind to take us in. This was so different from what we were used. It was a clay hut, really, a 1-bedroom,
Right.
heated by a potbelly stove, very primitive conditions. They had no bathrooms. So, and it was bitter cold. Excuse me for saying, but we had to use a pail. But from the goodness, they were a family of 4, and 9 of us came. So
In a
there
small
were
hut.
13 in that small
In that small hut. Wow.
You were rationed. We had no food. There, too, there was a black market, and my aunt had wonderful abilities as a knitter and things, and would sneak out on the black market to bring us a little piece of bread and potato that was floating. And the nutrition was not very good, to say the least. And how we managed in that house, I don't know, and my uncle developed typhoid. They left us after about a year because it was just too hard to be together. We didn't have enough food, and they went to a different labor camp. At that ghetto, there were soldiers, Romanian soldiers, that came and took my aunt every day to work in the fields.
To Aunt Bella?
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't take my mother. She never shared it with me. She did not like to speak about her experiences too much, and didn't want me to tell my children, oh, why pain them? I said it's important that they know what life was like.
Right.
I mean, and how lucky we are in this country to have everything.
One of the things you shared with me was you remember the sense of always being hungry.
Yes.
Always hungry.
Always being hungry. And you mentioned a little kindergarten class was formed by somebody from our
in the ghetto?
hometown. In the ghetto.
Okay.
That's where I had my first experience with Hebrew. And I was thrilled to death when I was able to tell them that today I had a piece of bread and oil. But as children always find playthings. My mother had made us a rag doll. And what saved us really was I was never separated from my mother. I was very fortunate. I saw death in the streets.
People literally starved to death.
Starved
You
to
remember
death.
that, yeah.
And she went to the river. It was at least about a mile to wash our clothing. Cleanliness was very important. We found little pebbles, and they made us a makeshift robe. So we had some.
So those were your toys, your
Those
playthings.
were the
yeah.
toys. And once I went with my mother to do laundry with my cousin, and to launder, I guess, the dolls' clothes that they made for us. And I fell into the river. My cousin said, oh, look, Aunt Tina, Tabo, there is a little girl in the water. And she didn't know how to swim. I didn't know how to swim. But she threw in a sheet, and I hung onto it. But it was such traumatic experience. Could not speak for at least 3 days. And they had some witchcraft that performed. Some woman came and she cracked some eggs on my forehead.
Do you remember
this
that?
I do remember.
You do remember this?
It was very weird. And
Yeah.
she said, don't worry, she will speak. And I started speaking again.
So it worked.
So who knows? Yes, it did work. It did work.
During that time, after your father had been transcripted in the Soviet Army, do you know if your mother had any contact, heard any word from him, had any idea where he had gone?
No, we had no inkling whatsoever.
Once he left, he was gone.
And my grandmother was really beside herself. She was very ill. And at the time, I don't know if you know of it, some people who are not Jewish probably don't know, but we are buried in shrouds. And my grandmother had a little sack of soil, because we're supposed to be buried with a little soil from Israel. And I questioned, as a child, you question, why is this and why is that? Why are you having these white things sewn? She said, I'm not going to be here long. You're my grandchild. I want you to light the candles when I'm gone. And she's the only one that really died a natural death there, and the only one that I have a grave site for.
And that's in Shargorot?
That's in Shargorot, which I've never gone back. I really have no desire to, because those memories were not good memories. But I remember that, and I remember her death. And of course, the ritual committee came, and they had to prepare her and put on the garments. I saw all of that. But at that time, they did not take me to the cemetery. They felt I was too young. I saw a lot. And it was a great loss. That I remember, and I remember lighting a candle for her. So that they were hard times, but we were with very kind people. As poor as they were, out of the goodness of their heart, they really took us in.
And it sounds like during that time in the ghetto with this kind, good-hearted family, that everybody tried to make the best of having a community as much as you could. under
Yes.
those circumstances. The Soviets came back to Shargorot, however, in early 1944, but this time they were considered liberators.
They were liberators.
They were liberators. They came back. Okay.
We started hearing, to this day, I really can't stand a lot of noise. And another point, I am very afraid of big dogs, like German Shepherds, because I used to see them chase Jews, and it was very frightening. In fact, here in the United States, I had to ask my friend who had a German Shepherd to please put him in a kennel, because I really was
So
scared.
frightening.
Yes, very frightened. Certain things stay with you, and I can explain why now. But I've gotten better. One of my daughters had a dog, but golden retriever. They're much gentler, and I got used to it. Yes, so it was very, very hard. But when the front came, the Russians, we heard a lot of bombing, and the proprietor of the little house that we were in, he went to a neighbor because the neighbor had a cellar. He said, if there's bombing here, we need to go down into the cellar.
Right.
So we were there, quite a number of people, and a 12-year-old boy could not stand it anymore. He had to see what was happening. So he ran outside, and when he came back, he was all excited, and people thought he's hallucinating. What's going on? He said, no, 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 there were Russians drinking in the street, and we are free, the war is over. And then we started believing him, and everybody went outside, and indeed, the war was over.
For you.
For
where
us.
your
It was
community
not
was,
over
yeah.
in other parts of the world, no, because as you know, the Hungarian Jews were taken much later.
later.
And yes.
But where you happened to be, had the good fortune of the Soviets arriving
Right.
and liberating you.
Right.
And as you said, the war's over, free to go. What did that mean, free to go? What did that mean for you and your family?
Very hard. We didn't know where to go, really.
Right.
Because every door, there was a song.
And you
to
have
the left
nothing.
and
Yeah.
to the right, every door is closed to me. We were born, although I was born in Romania, I didn't feel like a Romanian because I was robbed of everything. However, we wanted to go back home. My mother wanted to hear what happened to her family, what happened to her husband. But the Iron Curtain started setting in then too. And the Russians were taking over. They had schools that were established there. So we had a difficult journey to get there.
Do you remember how you even got there?
Well, from what my aunt had told us, she knew somebody, not Jewish, somebody from the government, and a mother, and so she helped her do some research where we could go safely, because sometimes if you returned, I know from my husband's stories and friends of mine, when they returned home in Poland, the Poles said, "What are you doing here? We thought you were murdered," because they took over their homes.
Right.
And they would murder the survivors. So you had to be lucky. There was also a lot of good luck and some good people. Thank God for them, the righteous Gentiles. So it was then.
And plus trains weren't running normally.
Right, and we went on a military train.
A military train, okay.
Yes, a military train. We went back home. We could not go into our house. The Russians had used it as a silo. They had grains there. And my mother begged them. She said, "I just want to go in the attic. My husband fought in your army." At that point, she did not know yet that my father
Right,
was killed.
right.
And so finally, they were convinced. And because of the soldier, he also let us into my maternal grandparents' house. They owned the house, but there were other families there, but they let us have a room there. Because it was very hard.
But you were not allowed to take your home back.
Oh, no,
No.
no. But they did allow my mother to go in, and she retrieved the pictures.
Which is
the
why we have a
album.
few of
course,
those
the money was gone,
Right.
but that's okay. We had our lives.
And a few pictures.
And our pictures. And my aunt started working in a bank there to sustain us, so we could bring food on the table. And my mother would also go with my aunt, and they would sell things to bring food on the table.
Even though it's still wartime and the Soviets, are moving on, moving further west, were you able to resume school? You're now about 7 years of age, school age.
Right.
Did that sort of sense of normalcy begin to return?
Sort of, yes.
Sort of, okay.
Yes. What happened was I went to a Ukrainian school run by the Russians. We were indoctrinated to love Stalin's picture. I remember walking to school. It was bitter cold. Also, they did not celebrate Christmas as such, but they celebrated Father Frost. And they would have a big celebration, and then they had us recite poetry or put on, and I had to memorize a poem and recite that. Remember that. I was a good student. I was just in first grade. But we saw that things were not good, and that's when my mother also discovered about the remise, what happened to her parents. And my father's best friend, who was also had been conscripted into the army,
With him?
came back, and he knew exactly when my father was killed. But at least I have the knowledge that he was fighting against the
So he was killed in action.
and I knew exactly, have the date, so I started observing it then.
Do you know if at that time, if your mother and the other adults, did they begin to have a sense of the enormity of what had happened during the Holocaust, what had happened to Jews throughout Europe? Do you think they were?
Oh, definitely.
Definitely knew
We
that
found,
by then.
yes, we found out horrible things that happened, and to our own family, an extended family. They were either murdered or they starved to death because you couldn't exist.
Right.
And working hard labor just on a piece of bread and, black water that they called coffee, potato and water.
Were any of your other family members were they able to make it back?
Which from extended family,
Yeah.
no. No. Just my aunt, my father's sister, and her family, 2 children. They survived, and their grandmother. Mine died, as I said before, and my mother and my aunt. And then we had to find a way to get out of town because we saw the handwriting on the wall. The Iron Curtain was setting in, and where would we go? We had to get out. So we had falsified papers saying that we were born in Poland. And when we were about to leave, my aunt, who was still working at the bank, they would not allow Bella. They would not allow her until the last minute to go on that train. And it was not a luxury train. There was also another incident there, a wonderful young man who was looking over documents and all. He knew who we were because his mother had been a Christian young man. His mother was a midwife to my grandmother and helped deliver some of her children. But he didn't disclose the fact that we were Romanians. He looked away and let us go on that train because he could have, and we wouldn't have been able to leave. The last minute they allowed my aunt to come, and we went on the train.
And they thought you were going to go to Poland?
Pardon?
Did they think you were going to go to Poland at that point?
Well, actually, we did.
You did go to Poland, okay.
We had a long journey. That journey I do remember. Because we hopped on trains, on freight cars, on coal cars. It took us 3 months to get from Romania to Germany.
And via Poland, yeah.
And to go through different borders. We posed as Greeks, we posed as different nationalities, and they would search us, and they would send the children. As Greeks, we asked for mayim. Mayim, of course, means water in Hebrew. They didn't know the difference, so they passed us up for Greek.
And so after 3 months, you make it into Germany. Why Germany?
Okay, in Germany, yeah, what's a good question?
Yeah, why Germany?
Because they established displaced persons camps in Germany. That's where survivors wound up. In fact, in some of the very same barracks where the SS were trained, we had these quarters, but at least we had shelter. But life was reborn. There were many sad stories, parents who lost children, and children who lost parents. I went with them to school.
And you did too?
Some of them were hidden in convents, some of them were hidden in homes, Polish homes, and then some parents came back or some relative came back. Some of them thought they were Christian, they didn't want to leave, but then they did. That's when I learned how to speak Polish, because when people approached my mother and they started speaking Polish, why are you speaking Polish to me? I don't speak a word of it. Well, your daughter speaks Polish. But as a child, you're forced to, and made some wonderful friends. And and believe it or not, those of you said, oh, school, do I have to go to school? Loved school, because we were like sponges. We were missing that period. Because I don't consider that year in the Ukraine school as very memorable. But here we learned history. We had wonderful teachers. And there were about 100 of us. There were a lot of marriages, people who lost children. It was so sad. I loved to perform, and I was on stage there and learned how to sing and perform. And my mother was sitting in the audience, and there was a woman with tears in her eyes. She said, I wonder if this child's mother is still alive to see her. She said, yes, I am. She said, I lost a little girl like yours, and you're so lucky. But as a result of our having lived through the war with the wonderful nutrition we had, I have horrible teeth. I'm a dentist's dream, and a lot of us, because we didn't have toothbrushes, we really had nothing.
Well, no nutrition.
Right, our nutrition was terrible, and we had health exams in DP camp.
And you were there for 3 years in the DP
I was
camps.
there for 3 years.
3 years.
Made some wonderful friends. We went on different trips with the school, but a lot of us were found to have tuberculosis, and I was one of them, unfortunately. Here, you have to remember, this was in 46, 47. I was in the DP camp from 46 to 49. In 47, my mother was told that I had TB and I had to go to a sanitarium. And I was about 9 at the time. And when she left me with other children. It was not nearby. It was an hour's ride by train. I only saw her once a week. When she came back, I was no longer with other children. I was quarantined, and I spent 9 months there with some nurses who were still very anti-Semitic. They would tell me, whatever tests they were going to do, you're going to cry, it's going to hurt. And I would grit my teeth. I said, no, I will not cry. I gritted my teeth and tolerated the pain. And I remember they had a wonderful social worker from Hayas that came at least once or twice a week. She brought me different art projects, and our family learned. We got in touch with them in the United States, and they would send packages. They couldn't, unfortunately, until the last minute send the medicine I needed, because they would only give streptomycin to people who had TB of the bones, and I had it in my lungs, so they had to perform surgery. And while they were performing surgery, my mother came with the streptomycin, but They
From
collapsed
the
along.
from the family members that were in the United States had sent
Yes, they had sent
Okay.
it.
it. You were there for 9 months.
I was there for 9 months. It was difficult 9 months.
Yes.
But there was a kind Danish doctor that she told my mother, I survived TB, I have a family, you'll see your daughter will survive as well.
And in the displaced persons camp, I think that's where Bella met her future husband, your aunt.
Actually, she met him before
Before
while we
that,
were
okay.
traveling, while we had the travels in secret. We were in Poland and many different places. She met him. He was a very fine person. And she emigrated. There was a quota system then, that how they let people in. You had to have a sponsor. So she got to go to the United States while I was in the sanitarium. She was here earlier. She came in 47. And we had to wait till 49. And especially we had to go through, you've all heard about Ellis Island. That was before they used to give people exams, and then they held them on Ellis Island. But after the war, you had to pass all the health exams before you boarded the ship to go to the United States. And my mother was very frightened because I had TB if they saw any sign, but thank God I passed that.
You described to me that you said, my mother was a survivor and a strong lady. Tell us a little more about her. I mean, she really was a strong lady. She got you through extraordinary, difficult times.
A lot of difficult time. I mean, to imagine yourself at 28, having lost your parents, having heard that you lost your husband, whom you were married to happily just for 7 short years. And that's why my parents never had another child, because Hitler's speeches were heard even when the year that I was born. And they knew a younger child would not have made it. They didn't know what was waiting for them, but they felt that they shouldn't have any more children. She would, to save my life, she would do anything.
Anything.
Went on the black market with her sister-in-law and did a lot. And then she was told that a widow should not come by herself to the United States, and that's when she met my stepfather, who was an Auschwitz survivor and lost his wife and child. He was considerably older, 15 years older. But my time in DP camp, I really remember, was a happy time, even though we had just one room, but we had the freedom and education. I even took some piano lessons, I remember, and the Germans, we used to get canned food, and we never heard of canned food, tuna, but the Germans did. So my mother, my stepfather, they would give the Germans, the farmers, the canned food, and they would in turn...
They'd give you fresh food.
Give us fresh food.
I chuckled when you told me the first time you said, we had this canned Spam.
Yes.
So they would happily take it, and we would get...
Absolutely, Spam, which is, of course, not kosher. We were used to
Right. And so you'd
kosher,
get...
we, at that point, you ate anything that you could get.
So 1949, you come to the United States.
I just wanted to make one point about DP camp, that General Eisenhower, he was only general then. He came to visit.
To your camp?
To our camp. But unfortunately, I was in the sanitarium. But one of my friends, whom I'm still in touch with now, she played the piano for him, and everybody was so thrilled that General Eisenhower, who later became president, was visiting. But yes, I'm sorry.
So no, you come to the United States again. Now you're in a new culture, a new language. What was that like for you and your family, your mother?
First of all, let me describe how I felt when we did not go in a luxury liner. We went on an Army transport. It was called General Hahn. We slept in bunk beds right near the engine room. And my mother said, please take the top bunk, because if you get sick this way, nobody, you don't have to worry. Of course, the people beneath me did. And my mother and I were ill the entire journey, because September, the ocean is very, very rough. And we could not eat anything, but a half a grapefruit somebody would bring us down. But the day that we landed in New York was one of the happiest days of my life. Seeing that Statue of Liberty.
You remember that?
Oh my God,
Yeah.
that's when my mother and I went up on the deck. At last we were free in a democratic country. I just can't describe it. We had family waiting for us whom I had never seen before. We had a wonderful, wonderful reception. It was hard because I was a green, I didn't speak a word of English, and at that time there was no bilingual education. We also had waited for quota. And we were poor enough to really get welfare, but we did not want it. It was a shame to do that. My stepfather did house painting, and this is a country of opportunities. It was sink or swim, and what they did was they put me in a class. I was 12 when I arrived, and they put me in a class where they were giving French. I don't know what they were thinking.
Well, they figure you spoke so many languages, I guess.
Yeah, well, and I was given an IQ test, and later in high school I was called in by the principal's office. I said, what did I do? I knew I was a good student. And he said, I've never seen anybody improve so much on IQ tests as you have. I said, listen. I said, you took a greenhorn who was here only 3 months. I didn't know the difference between a shoemaker or a tailor. And you gave me this test. It's a wonder I even passed it. I said, now does that explain to you why my IQ went up so much? So,
Rita, to make sure we have time for a few questions
Yes.
from our audience, I want to ask you just one more question. You said that when you came to the United States,
is that yours or mine?
I'm not sure. Okay, all right. Thank you, Sonia. That your mother was very protective of you. Will you just say a little bit about that? She was overly protective in some way. Yeah.
I couldn't go ice skating. I couldn't do many things because she was afraid. Now I'm afraid of the microphone.
Okay. So she wouldn't let you ice skate. She wouldn't let you swim. She was just, she protected you so
swim,
much.
I wasn't exposed to it. Right. I didn't have a bicycle. I didn't have a lot of things.
Right.
But I had my life. I had my freedom. I loved the United States. I am very patriotic. The flags are out all the holidays. And you don't know how lucky you are to be in a country where we can speak what's on our minds. We can criticize. I know our candidates are not always great. But at least
We'll
we
leave it
have
at
the
that,
freedom to
Yes, we do. Well, if you're okay, why don't we turn to our audience and ask if they have any questions to ask of you? Is that okay?
And then my final statement.
And then yes, absolutely. So it's our tradition at first person that our first person gets the last word. So to close the program, I'm going to turn back to Rita, and she'll give us her concluding thoughts. But we have time for some questions from you. Before we do that, I'd like to ask you to stay with us so that you hear Rita's concluding remarks during the Q&A period. Stay with us. We have microphones that will be coming down the aisle, so if you have a question, please wait till you have the mic. Make the question as brief as you can. I'll repeat it just to be sure everybody hears it, and then Rita will answer your question. And we won't have questions about the elections. So,
No.
okay, and so right in the front row, I think, Cheryl, you have a question. Yes. Why don't we get the microphone down to you? I think we got one. Here we go. Got a microphone coming right here in the front row. Thank you.
My dear cousin, why didn't you and your mother join our other aunt and uncle, Aunt Esther and Uncle Mendel, with their children to go to Israel instead of coming to the United States? I'm just curious.
The question asked is why Rita and family didn't join other family members and go to Israel
Yes.
and came to the United States instead.
Because my mother's only surviving sister went to the United States. In fact, I forgot to mention that when Israel was declared independent, I remember our school stayed up all night around the bonfire because at last we had a place to call our own, where to go to. But my mother said no, and my cousin was very Zionistic. He started to swim the channel. He said, I'm not going to the United States, even though my aunt had 2 sisters here. He said, I wanted to go to my country. So that is the reason they went to Israel and I went to the United States. I wanted to be on the Exodus. You know, I told her, since I'm a half an orphan, she said, no, my only child, you're not going anywhere. So, but I am very glad I made the choice to be here. Of course, I have a special love for Israel. And thank God, if we had been in Israel then, so many of the Jews would have been saved.
I know you want to share with us.
Yes, I wanted to share with you. This is the only thing, and I feel such closeness to. It's my father's prayer shawl, which amazingly, I don't know how my mother managed to carry it with her all through the war. And it's, my late husband used to wear it every holiday, and I too. And it's been present at every one of my grandchildren's bar and bat mitzvah, and whenever I wear it, I feel close to him. I feel like his spirit is with me. It's beautifully made. I found out this is sterling silver. It's removable, and I will always cherish it. His memory is always with me, but I feel a special bond by just having this.
Absolutely.
This one thing. Yep. It's my inheritance. Amongst other things, genes.
Absolutely. Okay, do we have any questions? Let's see if we have anybody else who has a question. Oh, I have one right back here. So,
After you moved to the United States, did you ever go back to Europe to visit?
oh, the question is, after you came to the United States, did you ever go back to Europe, and have you visited back there, been back there?
No, the only place, Italy and Spain, but I can't bring myself to go to Germany. I don't blame the new generation, but I just can't see myself spending money there. And I know Israel has wonderful relations with Germany. And I don't want to go back to Romania. I really don't have good memories, other than the very beginning of my childhood.
Right. Okay, thank you for
That
that.
answers your question.
Got another question right here. Yeah, I think there's two there. We have time for, let's take these 2 questions, and then let me just mention too that when Rita finishes with her closing remarks, Rita will stay up here on the stage, so if anybody would like to come up and ask Rita another question, or just, say hi, shake her hand, or get a picture taken with her, please absolutely feel free to do that. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right, let's take these last 2 questions, and then we'll close up the program.
So your aunts and uncles were killed by neighbors, Gentile neighbors?
Oh, the question is about your aunts and uncles that were killed by neighbors, Gentile
Yeah,
neighbors.
but were they farm implements or?
Or they what?
They were killed by neighbors, your grandparents.
Yes, by the same, yes.
By the same people who'd been their neighbors, right? Okay.
My question is, after years of starvation, when you did come to America, what is your favorite food?
So the question is, after all those years of starvation and poor nutrition, what is your favorite food?
I love sweets, of course.
Sweets.
You can see. In fact, my cousins here in the United States said, because of you, we had to eat everything off our plate because your cousin in Europe is starving. So, and I have a tendency to prepare way too much food. My kids always complain about that.
There's nodding in the front row
Because
here.
I never had enough, so my refrigerator is always full, and if I'm going to have dinner for 5 or 8, I think another 5 could drop in.
So
and I would
I
have
can get in line?
Absolutely.
Okay. I want to thank all of you for being with us today. Remind you that we'll have a first-person program each Wednesday and Thursday until the middle of August, so we hope you can come back and join us. Or the website will have information about First Person in 2017. So with that, I'd like to turn to Rita to close today's program.
I have my glasses. Senior moment. Oh, thank you. can I use this, or
Sure, just hold it.
can I go to, oh, okay. All right. Okay, I thank God that we survived one of our darkest periods in history. I'm grateful to the United States for opening its doors to us. It's the greatest country, as I said, in the world. We should appreciate the freedoms that we have and opportunities. I'm proud to be a U.S. citizen. I thank God, our men and women in the military, and thank them for the sacrifices that they have made in protecting our freedoms. We must remember that. We must remember the past, find courage in the future. We don't want our past to be our children's and grandchildren's future. We should never stand silent. Always speak up when you witness bullying. Prejudice. Hate is never, never right, but love is always right. Always do the right thing. Always take a stand. When you save one life, it's as though you have saved the world. I'm dedicating today to my grandparents who were brutally murdered by the neighbors 75 years ago, to the memory of my father, the 11 million people. It wasn't just Jews who were killed, but we were killed just, and the 1.5 million innocent children, and their only crime was being Jewish. I will continue telling my story. Now all of you will be able to pass it on to your children and to your grandchildren. And you can say you actually met a survivor, because there are some deniers. Some people say that the Holocaust did not happen. I hope and pray that none of you will ever experience war and hunger. Unfortunately, there is hunger in the world now. Remember what happened in Rwanda and Syria now. My heart goes out to all of them. And they lose families. May we enjoy shalom, which means peace, in the world. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.